let's get started. Well, everybody, thank you for coming to this last breakout session on computational resources for LSST, where we'll be focusing on the in-kind contributed resources, and in particular the IDACs. I'm Knut Olsen. I'm the Rubin in-kind program coordinator in charge of computing resources. This is Sierra Villareal, who is the technical IDACs coordinator, works here at SLAC. And other people have also contributed to this, to the thinking behind this presentation. So our agenda, which is online, is going to give some quick context around IDACs and the contributed computing resources. We'll have a short presentation by Stephen over here from the CADC on the Canadian IDAC to give you a sense for what IDACs will deliver during operations. And then most of the time here is really for discussion, because there are issues that we need to face up to in advance of the start of the survey. So with that, you've seen these slides before. We do have a code of conduct. If hopefully at this point there isn't time to have any problems develop, but if you do have them, there are people to contact about it. Yeah, let's aim to have a good, kind, trustful, respectful discussion. Virtual participants, you've been through this before. Remember to mute when you're not speaking, but feel free to unmute to jump in. We'd like to encourage anyone who's here at this session to contribute to the discussion. Sierra will be keeping an eye on Zoom and Slack for questions that come in that way. And let's begin. So this slide just summarizes the Rubin data and computing ecosystem and the many places around the world that contribute to this, highlighting the roles of the data facilities here at SLAC and the UK and France, and the networks that go between them, the summit and the data facility that are in Chile, and also the user facility in the cloud. The Rubin data and computing ecosystem includes a number of data access centers and independent data access centers, so IDACs. We have one full IDAC, which is in the UK, which will have a full copy of the data, and then roughly a dozen independent data access centers that will have a subset of the data, right? And these are listed here around the world. So because most of these in-kind computing centers don't have full copies of the data and are geographically distributed, this presents some challenges in how to make use of those together with the Rubin data. And is thus important that we think about those use cases in advance. We do think this geographic distribution and the diversity that they present also has a lot of strengths because they have different experiences, legacies, and expertise that they can all offer. So as a reminder, what Rubin delivers is data products for the community to access. And all data rights holders will have access to the US Data Access Center in the Google Cloud. There's also the Chilean Data Access Center in La Serena. And that the size of that data set, of course, grows over time, roughly to 200 petabytes or so by the end of by year 10 of the survey. And for computing, the the plan written now some years ago was always to have 10% of the data processing capacity available for user computing. This graph over here on the right shows the growth in CPU cycles needed to keep up with the data release processing, which is roughly 400 million core hours in year 10. So that means that the user computing is scaled to around 40 million core hours in year 10. And of course, will be around a factor of 10 less than that right at the very start of the survey. And these are, as I understand it, the computing cycles available through the US data facility, and perhaps other places. But what IDACs then can deliver is computing, storage, different kinds of services, and computing resources in excess of that 10%. And if you add up all the computing resources that are being offered through the IDACs, it's a factor of several per user in what they'll be able to use. The idea is that these should be accessible by any data rights holder, so that those who need those computing resources can get to them, but they can be focused on particular science opportunities and collaborations, which is something that we've been working on. They can also have support for other non-LSST data sets, so that introduces some ability to do unique science at these IDACs. There can be support for serving publicly shareable LSST data. So we do have an example IDAC, which is going to be a public archive, and Stephen will talk about that. And so one of the questions that we've asked is, what are the tailored services that each IDAC can provide to maximize the science for all with LSST, and that will be part of our discussion. But in order to give you a sense then for what an IDAC might offer, Stephen, I invite you to come up and talk about the Canadian IDAC.
Thank you. My microphone, I can stand anywhere. So,
yeah, you need to talk towards the microphone. Yes.
Yeah. So I wasn't originally going to say anything, but then I was reading through Knut's slides, and I realized that I was going to say something at the end of the discussion page that was going to go long. And so I figured I'd actually might as well write it down so that I would at least remember what I was going to say. So the CDC aims to provide for the current data release that's available to all data rights holders, a copy of the COADs, a copy of Object Light, so not the individual images and not the full object table or the full source table, so basically the static sky. And then associated with that, we're going to have 3,000 cores for processing and 2 petabytes of user storage. And that's going to be provided via our Campfire Science Platform that we've been running for 5 years, which is a little bit like the Rubin Science Platform, but it has a few extra bits. So it has the same notebooks as the Rubin Science Platform, but also provides virtual desktops. And it also provides a bit more compute power per user. So instead of like the birthright, which is two cores plus 1 terabyte of storage, we provide considerably more user storage to people who ask for it. We don't necessarily allocate that right at the beginning, that people can request larger chunks of compute, larger chunks of user storage. And the other key feature that we have is user contributed software containers, so that it's anybody can come along and say, here's a piece of software that I would now want to share with the community. And then it becomes available via, it's like Google Play or the App Store. It's not like Apple and Google write all that software. It's written by third parties that made available for those platforms. And so similarly, we have the same thing where there's a pick list and you can pick different software things that people have written. And what we find is typically a group will come along with 20, 30 people. One of them will be really tech savvy, and he or she will make this available, and they'll support the rest of the group, which means we don't have to, which is kind of the key part of all this and why it works, is that it distributes some of the support to the actual community, the sort of power users of the community rather than us doing everything. We also have, at the moment, I would say a very bad batch system, but it does exist, it does work. In 2 years' time, by the time of DR1, we will have a good batch system. And then we have a cutout service that works quite well on all of our, we've had it for years. And we'll also have a copy of Rubin portal as opposed to the platform. The portal is the graphical user interface. And while I think our platform and notebooks are better than what RSP offers, it's pretty clear that the portal graphical user interface just blows anything we have out of the water. And then we also have various VO programmatic interfaces to all of our data. So that's currently allocated on a first come, first served basis, and that's what we'd like to continue to do. I'll talk about that towards the end with when we get to the discussion part. And then for DRN-2, the thing that's world public, we plan to offer everything to the wider astronomical community, not just the data rights holders, but everybody. And that sort of feeds into, this is the plot there is where CDC users are. And as you can see, there's a thin strip in Canada, but actually 85% of our users are not Canadian, they're international. And that's sort of some built into our kind of our way of thinking is we're all about democratization of astronomy and providing data access to everybody. So that's kind of our one of our philosophies. So that describes what we have and what we're planning to offer. And back to you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. So that was great. And we have a dozen or so IDACs. Each is unique in their own way in either the services that they have, the particular data sets that they will offer, the legacy that they've built up, over the years. There's also many similarities. Some will be running the Rubin Science Platform in full, and so there will be essentially an identical interface to what's available through the US Data Access Center. But others will be a mix, as Stephen just mentioned, and others will be an entirely different system altogether. The one thing that will tie them all together, of course, is an authentication system that when you log in and to an IDAC, it has to be able to respect data rights, right? And so it'll be using Rubin's authentication service once that is available to make sure that the people who are accessing these resources do have data rights.
Will you have at some place like a description of all of them, that if I come in as a user and since you say not everything is on every IDAC, so that I can carefully pick and choose where I go, so there will be some. Yes.
So currently what we have is we have a slide deck that you can access that essentially is like this for all of the IDACs. We have collected that into a spreadsheet to show you that that's now also available through the in-kind page. Which data sets are expected where, what use cases they're expected to support, the scale of computing, and what kinds of computing resources are there. And I think over the next year and a bit, we'll make that more visually pleasing and useful as much as we can. So, but I invite you to go to the and we have links here in this presentation. Want to provide a little bit of more background. So last year, in March of 2023, we organized a virtual workshop that was both science community focused. So we had 2 days of 2 half days, I should say, of really science use case discussion and development, which featured the collection of lots of use cases contributed by you, the community, and the scale of computing resources that they would need. And that was a really good effort, and we appreciated it very much. It was followed by a technical workshop, so mainly the IDAC providers, as well as members of Rubin Data Management and Rubin Observatory, to discuss some of the technical issues and challenges that our IDACs network is facing, and trying to couple that with the demand that came from the user side. So that all of that material is available at this link and remains quite relevant. And we'll be trying to keep this up to date, and also potentially have future workshops to continue this discussion. Want to give a little bit of summary of what sorts of information is in the science use cases. So we have the publicly available spreadsheet here of the 48 defined use cases that provided info on sort of what data they would need, including ancillary data, not just Rubin data, what software interfaces they would expect to need to use, the analysis plans and derived data products, the scale of computing that they would need to use, including whether or not they needed GPUs, whether there were specific service architectures or software needed to run these use cases, whether the people presenting these use cases had already formed a relationship with the data access center. In most cases, they had not, but I think that work is continuing. And what the comfort level behind the people presenting the use case had with LSST data products and software tools. Some of the takeaways that we took from this work was that there's a large range in the demand for the scale of computing resources and storage. Let's say there are a few large cases which ask for a lot, and many more smaller use cases that form sort of a long tail. Already, just with these 48 defined use cases, we will be subscribing something like 10% of the total planned IDAC computing resources. And of course, this set of use cases is likely to be representative, maybe the things that people are thinking of doing early on in the survey. And so you can begin to see that the demand for computing is going to be high, especially as people's creativity and imagination take off with the release of data. The other takeaway that I don't think we've really fully explored yet is that the demand for GPU resources is high, and that many use cases said that they needed GPUs, often I think for training machine learning algorithms and the like. And we do have some IDACs that are offering GPUs, although that when the call for computing resources went out, I don't think people appreciated sort of the rapid growth that GPU usage was going to have in this drone.
Are you actually, so if you think about GPU resources, right, the biggest in the US are at OLCF and ALCF.
Yeah.
Are you talking to them at all? I mean, they are very interested in any science case, right? Oscar is not like, like, are you talking to them?
So no, I've not been talking to them. Although we have been, maybe could ask Adam, if you want to say anything about discussions that you had.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking with Texas Advanced Computing Center, which I know has GPUs built now and in their future roadmap. And I expect we'll have some subset or maybe even a large or complete subset of the data there. It's not planned out, but that's at least for the sort of NSF funded astronomy plus computing community. That's the one of the main avenues.
And just to be clear, right, if you get resources at ALCF and OLCF, only 20% of them are connected to DOE PI, right? The rest is like open to everybody in the world, right? It's not there. It's really very flexible, and those resources are much bigger than NSF.
Catherine,
and
maybe
ALCF
send
are
contact information for those places?
great, thank you.
I'm just wondering about your first bullet in the takeaways, the
Yeah.
demand for CPU storage dominated by a minority of use cases.
Yeah.
Is that a minority as measured by the use case count, or a minority as measured by the number of users that would benefit from those use cases?
It's
I guess-
actually, it's just the, looking at the number of use cases and the scale of computing resources that they demand. So it's just use case count.
Right,
Yeah.
you saw those, do you expect that those really CPU heavy cases would actually be ones that are going to benefit large portions of the collaborations for which they came?
Yes, yeah. For instance, it's, large survey cross-matching between large surveys. I think Tom's there it is. It's strange standing up here. Facial recognition software isn't working. Anyway, yes. So I think yeah, those large use cases generally do benefit large numbers.
We have one question from Slack.
Yeah.
Which is Franz asks, regarding the 48 use cases mentioned, what fraction of them can be done on the RSP for individual accounts, on any IDAC or on, let's say, a specific bespoke IDAC?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. My understanding is that Rubin Data Management has looked at the use cases. No, I'm looking at Phil here.
These 48.
Yeah. So we have not done. We did not go through and then try to pair directly individual use cases with IDACs. We sort of left it up to the science user community to see that connection themselves, because they are the ones that best understand it. But it is something that I think that we need to take a closer look at. It's a good question. Our intent is really to try to make that area more explicit.
Yeah, I should know this, but these 48 use cases, are they all specifically for bulk analysis, or do they include things that can be done within an individual's quote on the US stack?
Yeah, it's a mix, right? I mean, some are smaller that really could be done by individuals, and some are much bigger. Yeah. I invite you to have a look at that. So we wrote down just a few additional questions that might be points of discussion here. So one thing is these representative use cases that we've sort of been using to try to understand the scaling and the pairing of science needs to computing resources. Do they continue to reflect the priorities of science collaborations, who are the sort of the science community that we're engaging with? Are we missing additional use cases in order that are needed to reflect the priorities of the science collaborations as they evolve? And then the last question is, what do you, the user community, feel is your current level of preparation for actually executing these use cases? I think at the last year, at the time they were written down, was a good start, but clearly there's more needed to really prepare them to be run. And interested in hearing from you what that level of preparation, what it looks like. I'm happy to stop at any point to discuss this, but if nobody wants to jump in right now, I'm just going to keep sort of giving the context. Okay. Another point that came up in the workshop last year was the technical capabilities and the capacity, right? So as you saw from Stephen, and is available from other IDACs as well, IDACs have provided information on what use cases they are preparing to be able to support, what scale of resources, CPU, storage, and GPUs they have available, what data products they intend to host, the software infrastructure they aim to run in order to support the scientific use, and whether there are any areas of concern. That those were all, and as I mentioned, produced in slide format. We've condensed this into a table, which you can get to at the link here, and it's meant to provide a somewhat quicker overview of what data, what use cases, what capacity is there. But some of the questions that I think remain and need some discussion is we'd like to continue to get updates from the technical resource providers of what data holdings, the data transfer, the software services, all informed by the use cases that they are doing. And we've had some good discussion, particularly of data transfer this week. One data product that almost all IDACs are very interested in having is the object light catalog, which is not yet defined data product, but it's a narrower version of the object catalog. And we'd like to have as few versions of that data product as possible, ideally one, right? To avoid having to transfer many different versions of catalogs to different places. And so I'm going to make a proposal of what that object light catalog should look like, and we as a group will come to the other question, yeah,
Should we wait for questions or just
jump in at any time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say like a little bit more about what you envision that process to be? Because I'm really interested in that. Like how that are you trying to collect requirements from the IDACs that would be boiled down into like an initial proposal for an object light?
So I think what I would do is I'm going to look over the use cases that we have and the kinds of science that are being done there, and then look at the columns that are available and decide whether there are columns that we could drop in an object light catalog. And
I don't have any doubt that there are like nearly 1,000. So
yes, so and I think I think that's the only way to make it start.
And you're aiming for like 150 columns, not.
Yeah, not at that.
The other way of thinking will be to look for size, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
You can make this catalog much less than a petabyte. It will fit in a regular database.
well, the numbers have been quoted so far, and the ones that we're planning buying hardware for are kind of 150 terabytes by the end survey end, and 50-ish by DRR.
Okay, so okay. But that's a nice number. I mean, so there's a number.
No, I mean, that number can change, but you've got to give us warning. You can't, because you've got to buy hardware a year in advance of.
That is significantly smaller. That's a tenth.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's 1,000 columns, then boil it down to 100. Yeah.
That's a reason.
And I can't actually think of it. I don't know what object pool is going to have. I have to look at the columns. I can't conceive of more than 100 columns being useful, but I may not have thought of all the columns.
And so there are some columns, of course, that are going to be filter dependent, and so any column like that gets multiplied by 6 in number. So it quickly grows. We'll see how easy it is to get it down to really sort of a minimum set.
Can you?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, at some point, and it doesn't have to slow this discussion down about the Rubin object-like catalog. It may be that we're presented with the happy challenge of having, a Rubin Euclid-like catalog. And, what would that look like as far as the IDAC go? And would it be independent catalog from this one, or combined? Those are that we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah. So the message I've gotten from Rubin data management and the data facilities that they want as few versions of this catalog to ship around as possible. But that does compete against, if you want Rubin plus Euclid, want, say, a galaxy-focused catalog versus a star-focused catalog or a time domain-focused catalog, that starts to expand the number of possibilities. And I guess the question for Rubin then is, how many versions of this catalog are they going to support?
Yep.
Okay.
That's why I said happy and challenged.
Yes.
This is a very unfair question,
Yes.
but you said we sent a survey like what 2 years ago, and people hadn't appreciated how fast GPU, the usage of GPU was going to
Yeah.
grow.
So the survey was 1 year ago, but when the call for contribution was made, for data computing resource contributions, that was 4 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah.
So average them, and you get a third of an LSST lifetime.
Yeah.
And if paraphrasing what you said, in a
Mhm.
third of the LSST lifetime, the computational resources needed change radically.
Yep.
So what's the plan to make sure that in year 3, the current scheme is now obsolete because of some significant innovation in machine learning, AI, or hardware technology?
Yeah. I have to be honest and say I don't think there is a plan.
Okay,
But maybe Bob has it.
I did say it was an unfair question
There's
when I
no
said.
plan. I think we have to work together as we go forward, and as we understand what's happening, we have to start making choices. That's why I would say, without having talked to anybody about it, the object-like catalog, there's going to be a version that comes out first, and then what comes out at year 5 could be somewhat different, or maybe a lot different.
And
And the only thing I think you have to be careful of being infinitely flexible, right? Because flexibility does come at a cost.
of course.
And one area of flexibility is in the installation and purchase of hardware. So IDACs are not buying everything all up front, and there is a refresh schedule, but it's building up hardware over time as at the facility. So I think there is some capacity for adjustment. But,
I think, sorry if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously my question was provocative,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
But I think a really important thing is that we understand how we track the changes of technology, because in my opinion, we were a little bit late at realizing the GPU were going to be needed.
Yeah.
And we need to understand what, because the community is going to say like, I want more at all points in time. We need to figure out how we understand that they actually need more.
Right.
Or something different.
We have 2 questions online.
Oh, okay.
So, Gotham, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Knut, the other thing about all of this with the IDACs is there always a plan for refreshing the hardware periodically? I mean, things fail, especially things like hard disks, if they're mounted, they don't have a lifetime that's anywhere near the full 10-year survey. And is that part of us considering technical capabilities within the science collaborations? Is should we know which IDACs have some built-in redundancy or built-in plan to refresh their hardware when we're making decisions about where to do what science?
Yes. So all IDACs have a refresh plan, and in many cases they, since they are the places that are hosting IDACs are competing, larger scale computing resource providers, that is sort of built in on the provider side, that things are always getting retired and moved in. In other cases, it's more of a more punctuated sort of refresh schedule, but it's really up to them. But all of them have committed to the equivalent of 2 to 3 refreshes of the full hardware over the course of the 13-year operational lifetime of it.
Did you cover the ones that you were
and represent.
I think we can answer that.
Okay, okay.
You can alternate.
So we have some schema management tools that could easily be used to help with defining a project life. Like almost now, I can talk to you a little bit offline and have some details about that.
That'd be great.
And it wouldn't be difficult to extend what we have to support like tagging columns by different groups that, you know, if we wanted to talk about different subsets. Like you mentioned for like cosmology or for Milky Way or whatever. And then I think we need to maybe have a conversation about how to figure out maybe to not make having multiple copies quite as onerous as it sounds, because I think what people envision is we make them statically and then we're like paying for an enormous amount of disk space to maintain a bunch of these different things. But if we worked out a scheme with the IDACs where we do a production, we generate their shards and ship them out and then delete them on our end as soon as they've been received. And there's no, it's not actually that much more expensive for us to send out the same shard to many places or different shards. It's the same amount of outbound bandwidth, more or less. I mean, it's not really that big a deal. So I think that's something that we ought to look at instead of just going, oh, it means extra petabytes. It doesn't have to mean extra petabytes. It's a concept that we've had floating around since like 15 years ago. That groups might want different subsets.
So the main driver for reducing the number of object light catalogs came from the Rubin side and not wanting.
I believe that, but I mean, I think we maybe we need to think a little more deeply about whether that's actually
I appreciate it. Thank you.
as big an obstacle as it seems. Will and I will go arm wrestle later.
100 different versions of this catalog.
I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think
Okay, 9.
Another online question.
So we have a question online from Ken. Ken, if you want to unmute.
I can find the button. There we go. Yes. So has there been much discussion of trying to scavenge or get access to existing opportunistic resources, particularly on the GPU side, given that, you know, hardware lead times being what they are these days? Last I heard A100s, you were looking at a year or more.
I don't really have a clear answer to the question. I think individual IDACs that might be offering GPUs should maybe jump in, but I think there are some that sort of have them as part of their existing larger computing facility. And so they may be available soon or already, but I don't really hardware procurement times, not just for GPUs, but I guess especially for GPUs is a challenge that people are facing.
I can follow fence on that question with another unfair question. On the software side, the IDACs will to some level presumably be the places where in-kind contribution software is run. And is there a thought on how you're going to maintain the software as well as the hardware?
Yeah, so I think for individual software packages, that's going to have to be a conversation between the developer of the software who wants it for their science and the IDAC center that is supporting it. And you know, before they accept your software, they may want to make sure that it's not going to break their system, and then it's likely to be on the person providing the software to maintain it. I would think, but you know, of course, security risks can pop up on it.
I just wonder if that needs a bit of communication and thought that you're not, you know, we're all ramping up to day 0,
right?
But then it took me a while to twig that the software that we're providing has to be run for 11 data releases.
Sure.
I'm hoping that I will have found a different job by then. Probably, I don't know.
So one of the areas that we covered in the technical discussion last year was policy, right? And so that there's a lot of things that fall under policy, and I think this is one of them. And we started thinking about a few that we should dig deeper on. I do think it's up to the IDAC providers themselves to really, because they're the ultimate people who are responsible for the safety of the computing system and the use of it, that they need to have policies in place. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, so, I mean, the CDC's containerization system, where you can upload your own container, kind of solves this problem. Not perfectly, because it's still up to you to maintain the software if things change drastically. On the other hand, it does make it very easy for you to maintain your software, where we're not checking everything each time. It's up to you to, if things break, you're only breaking your container, you're not breaking the system.
If software ecosystems outstrip you, you can pin your little bubble to NumPy version,
I mean,
whatever you
our
might
system,
need.
our system was originally conceived to deal with the ALMA problem, with each version of CASA tuned to each cycle of ALMA, and so you have to have multiple versions of the same software continuously, because if everybody wants to go back a year to reduce that software, it's a different package. They're not backwards compatible.
As extreme version of that, I have a container that has a once a year touch from me on that system that allows IRAP to run. So
Right,
it
so-
works very well.
Yeah, that might be a good way to solve that.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. And I want to just double check. So we had the question on GPU procurement timescales online. If any IDACs in the room want to address that question, or the last point here is if GPU availability is really something that science collaborations need more access to, this is something that we could put in as a resource need for expansion of in-kind programs if people demand it, right?
So we're not currently offering GPUs. On the other hand, we just had our last I see Wes cringing. We're not going to offer them your GPUs, Wes.
Thank you.
However, our most recent round of contracts indicate that GPUs will be available a lot faster and cheaper than we previously thought. So watch this space, I think, is the thing.
Okay. All right. Another question that has come up is data transfer, right? So yes, so for the object-like data products, we do have to think about data transfer and the number of versions, and we just had this discussion. More serious issue for data transfer is imaging data. So there are a number of IDACs that aim to host the collated imaging data products, which all told are close to a few petabytes in volume. And so a discussion has happened around also how is the data transfer going to work in practice. And so Fabio Hernandez has provided a very nice overview of data transfer, the mechanism, and how we can solve this problem. So the data transfer is going to be based on use of Rusio, which is used in the higher energy physics community. And this will be maintained at the US data facility and configured to have the data transfer going as. But networking is an issue. So I think the network here is going to rely on a few IDACs to serve as redistribution centers of data. Right? So that they are the first recipients of the data, and then they agree to be nodes in a network that farms that data out to a lot of places. And that will reduce the burden on that initial first jump. So yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned Fabio Hernandez provided documentation on this or
Yes.
something. Where is that?
So as we do have links to some of the documents in the slide set from the workshop last year,
Okay.
but he posted a lot of things in a Slack thread at this meeting. So we will copy that out and put it into a place where we have sort of more permanent.
I can't link it into the workshop Slack because it's in the LSST Slack, but if you
Yes.
go to the IDAC coordination group, there is active discussion there.
In
Yes.
SDC.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, so it should mention that we do have a Slack channel on the LSSTC Slack workspace called IDAC Coordination Group. And should mention that we had a nice discussion with Adam Bolton and Jin Chiang and Wei Yang this week. And are going to use that IDAC coordination group Slack channel to talk about data transfer. So if this is of interest to people here, encourage you to join that Slack channel.
Another question that I have, did people like in TP3 get the data for DP02 through this system of Rubin or not really?
Yeah, DP02, I don't know.
No.
No.
Yeah.
No,
I don't believe so.
Flavio mentioned to me that maybe I misunderstood that the USDF was already conducting experiments to transfer data to other IDACs. Is that happening? And if that
No,
is
that's
so,
to France and UK.
Yeah.
Those are not IDACs. But we don't consider them IDACs because they're processing centers.
right.
And we're transferring data between those.
So you're already transferring data to the UK?
I believe, yeah.
Because as far as I know,
Yeah, data.
I mean, yeah, but we got it
Didn't go
from,
through Rossi. That may not have gone through Rossi.
no, I actually did, we're talking about DP02 because I actually did the transfer and I got it for, TP3 through like a different mechanism. So my question is there a possibility to conduct an experiment where we get it using the system from USA?
So
Or are we getting it from France too?
I think our current expectation is as we ramp up toward DP1, we are going to start testing data transfers with Russia storage elements.
Right.
But that is very much something that we are still sorting out with infrastructure folks.
Okay.
One other question. I know that you are all very aware that NERSC is the computing facility for desk, right? Should it be like somewhere in the like, do you think we can just use whatever you decide for the IDACs and then like the data transfer questions, for example, and it will just automatically then be okay for NERSC as well? Or do you think it should be somewhere there explicitly in your consideration, like?
I think it's a question for Adam.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. So we've separately been talking with blanking on the name, Nacho Sevilla, is that right? And Matt Becker, because I think the full desires and requirements for desk at NERSC are probably more detailed and possibly larger than the average IDAC. So that is to some extent a separate conversation, but we have also moved both of them into this broader conversation about IDAC data mobility, and we'll have that as one of the many endpoints in the list, so that can benefit from any of the broader discussion and arrangement.
Yeah. So I think we've had good discussions that have firmed up at least my understanding of the data transfer mechanisms, and then we're going to keep working on that. Adam is preparing a white paper, I guess, on whole data transfer.
Yeah, an initial policies and procedures document.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the last topic here, although we can go back and discuss any of these points, just because I think this is likely to have some feature some opinions. Let's see. So then is the Rubin resource allocation process, which you might have heard about in different sessions this week, right? So so Rubin Observatory is defining a process as quoted here to grant storage and or computational processing resources in excess of the basic quota allocated to all data access center accounts, which is designed, to be aimed at the resources of the U.S. data facility is 10% per user computing. that will be available to Rubin users. Right, so that you saw the growth in data release processing cycles needed. 10% of that should go to user computing in the current understanding. This would be in excess of that basic quota, right, attached to users, which is roughly a terabyte per user, half a terabyte of database space, and maybe a few cores of computing, sort of interactive usage. And anyone from DM will should speak up if I'm wrong about those numbers. But this is, as I think as Frosty pointed out, is you take the pool of computing that you have, divide by the expected number of users and the duty cycle that you expect them to be using them on, and you come up with an average number. Whereas it's elastic, might be some more heavier users that don't need as much, and so yeah, it's an average. But there will be a scale beyond which this basic quota won't be enough. You'll need batch resources, and so that is where the Rubin resource allocation process is aimed. But of course, there may be very large scale and sort of intermediate scale. I think Stephen has some thoughts on this. I'm going to invite him to present a slide here. But sort of the discussion that we've had. So what does this mean for the IDAC resources? And some thoughts here, and then Stephen, I'll ask you to present your last slide. Right. So for allocating the IDAC resources, the goal is really to ensure productive, efficient, and equitable use of them. So everybody can do the science that we've been planning now for so long and are excited about. I think that linked with that is the ecosystem of computing and data infrastructure that IDACs provide. We understand that these IDACs are bringing in past experience in supporting their user communities. We want to leverage that experience. We've also been encouraging science collaborations with IDAC providers to sort of develop a relationship and some understanding of how to do the science on their facilities. We don't want to get in the way of that, right? So a proposal here is we want to continue to allow this relationship to evolve, particularly between the science collaborations and the IDACs, right? In order to make the best use of those resources. We also want IDACs that have a history of supporting science users to be able to use that experience to see, to decide how best their resources will serve the Rubin community. But we do have, we want to make sure that the resources are well used. And so if there are IDAC resources that really can't define a clear role or a clear relationship with a user community or a set of use cases, we want to be open to having those resources included in a call for proposals in a resource allocation process. And then we can use the subscription rate of those resources as a way to guide policy and usage going forward. So there may be a role, I think, here for the resource allocation committee to play in IDAC. But so Stephen, you had some thoughts on this, which I think have been growing over the week. I'm going to let you present.
So my thoughts are kind of selfish ones, the ones that reflect Canadian as well as the data centers do all these things. So it's not, I don't want to speak for all IDACs, I just want to speak for us. But if we're representative perhaps of the class of IDACs. So first off, these are my slides. These are yours. You.
Correct. I forgot that I had an extra slide. Okay.
Right. So I'm going to start with the last bullet point first because I think it was simplest. So for the public part of our offering, we really think that working on a first come first served basis with not a rack allocation process is really the only way to go. We're not offering quite as much resources to those people, and we want to to be as flexible as possible for as many people as possible. Now, turning back to the stuff that for Rubin data rights holders, we have our experience with Campfire. This actually goes back to a point that Tony Tyson made to me like 15 years ago, which is the usage patterns are sort of flat in log space. So taking an average is not really representative of what Foster says the average user has this much. It's not necessarily capturing the full picture. Our experience is that most users actually require like very little resources, and then some users require more, and then a very small number of users require a lot of resources. We're really good at this at the moment. Things may change in the future because we're moving into SKA territory where we're going to be moving into a bit more like this for all users. Some users are going to require a lot of resources, but we're really good at some users require some users. So I think we best serve users that require a bit more compute power, a bit more than RSP provides. But we're not currently optimized for a large single user allocation. So we think first come, first serve is, which is what the mode we're currently operating in, is the best way to go. However, we are open to a rack process if that's what Rubin decides. If there's going to be one, we'd love to be part of that process as much as possible. And we're going to do a little bit of extra work, but that's something we have to do for SKA, but not to this in future anyway. So I think it's going to be fine.
I think we're the same. We have the same philosophy. If I've written down something like this, we assume like 90-something% of all users will be happy with their ORSP and their access to.
Right.
And then the rack is really for that third one, and the middle one actually have double.
Yeah, so we'd like to contribute to. So it's like 90% is RSP, 1% is rack. We'll deal with the 9.
The 90%. Yeah.
That's what we'd like to do. But we realize that Bob has made the point abundantly clear that we're not providing resources for Canadians, we're providing resources for LSST. So we are listening to what's wanted. We just think this is what we're good at, and this is what we'd like to do. Are there any actual questions for specific CBC before you go back to the generic?
Yes, I have. I mean, this might be a question for all the other IDAC folks as well. But I mean, do you think that there is unique in being good at this middle range, or do you expect it to be true of every IDAC?
That would be a question for every IDAC. From what I've heard, I think it's probably true. Just like in terms of the scale of resources available, it's not as large as as NERSC. But I think that's a question that I have to ask it.
Yeah, I would say, given the scale of resources provided by your typical IDAC, they mostly fall in this middle range bucket. They're not the very large computing centers, right? Although some of them are embedded inside of those. The scale of resources is sort of like a few times what could be available in that 10% allocation of the SDN. So a lot of them, I think, are in this middle ground.
It's a very interesting concept as to like the segment of the community that's best suited to going to items, which I haven't informed it. Thought a lot about the first one and the last one. Between the plan, give them that, we give them 2 more cores on Google, does that work with it? Does it like, can you give them some allocation? But this is maybe a nice way of saying, actually, here's a good niche. This is the kind of thing.
I mean, this is our customer base now.
Yeah.
I mean, the people use our thing and then use they have 2 cores and they're happy. And that's actually a lot of our users are like that. But the people we like to deal with most, just because they provide a bit more challenging, are these guys.
Can I just comment on that? I think what makes the CADC's situation particularly good at dealing with those middle people, I'm one of those, is the ability to spin up a couple cores to do a quick image reduction or whatever if I need it, but also then the ability to launch a few hundred jobs in a semi-scheduled way to access a lot more resources. And I don't see places that are good at both of those. I haven't used other places that are good at both of those at once.
Yeah, I mean, it's the flexibility where you diddle around for a bit and then you scale out of that. And then,
Yeah.
sorry, Sierra, I think you had your hand up.
We have a question remote from Gotham, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, so thanks, Sierra. The middle and the high use case scenario are really worrying from a technical point of view, right? Like, unlike telescopes where allocation committee has worked for ages, compute resources are much more heterogeneous. So are you expecting users to bundle up their code in some kind of Docker container that just runs automatically in the IDAC, or are they going to have to install everything on each IDAC that they run on? And if they're doing some reprocessing over 10 years and they get assigned different resources each year, what's the overhead that causes them? And then on a related note, how many of these IDACs have any human support for any of this computation going on? I don't think a lot of the light IDAC proposals I've seen came with much more than we will help you log in to a machine. But who is going to help grad students or postdocs getting their pipelines up and running?
So I can answer both those questions. One is from the SKA perspective, that's exactly what's going to be happening, is you have a container, the container moves the data. And they're going to be using a scaled up version of what the CDC, probably going to be using a scaled up version of the CDC is providing, but scaled to the 10,000s of cores. To the second one, the way we do provide a fair amount of support to our existing users, but it's actually a lot of it's delegated to power users within a group. Just naturally, people talk to the people they know, and then one person in the group who just is the guru, and people talk to them, and they help the users. And so we get to offload a lot of our work by doing that. It's not zero work for us, but it vastly reduces our workload by having this sort of people helping, power users helping other users.
I guess I'm really skeptical about that support model being feasible when these groups are competing with each other to do LSST science.
Yeah, I want a second. Are you saying that this will happen naturally? Do you expect this to happen naturally, or that you will facilitate this to happen and set up the training?
This is what has naturally happened with over the last 4 years for us.
Okay.
Okay. Partially because, well, so I don't, does it scale up to Rubin, and or is there perhaps more competition? I don't know. We're not kind of, we're just in the last year really started to get into resource contention, where we actually have less resources than people want, and sometimes things don't start. So there may be problems in the very near future, but right now that's exactly what has happened. It's because the containerization with the power users providing the software, and therefore also providing support for that software, and therefore by extension providing support for the usage of the platform as well.
So user support was a topic that we covered at the technical workshop, and so there is lots of thinking behind this, and there's your experience, and there are user support FTEs that are assigned to every IDAC, and I think the question is whether we fully understand certain scope of it. But maybe
I just had a question that's germane to this topic. So
yes.
Won't change it necessarily. So one of the biggest barriers between that, I guess, let's say sub-bullet 1 there of just working at a small scale and sub-bullet 3 of very large scale thing is transition to using a batch system, and that could be a big barrier or deterrent or big learning curve. I was just curious, in that second bullet there, where does that transition have to happen? Is that second sort of more than just a little bit of resources? Are you still able to use those in that small scale sort of user experience kind of way, or do you have to transition to a batch system?
Right now, what we have is a bad batch system. Okay, it has to become a good batch system in the next 2 years. Full stop. SKA, even LSST disappears in a quick. we have to have something like that for SK. What's that?
Don't say that.
But just like, you know, or the point, so the batch system does require, there's a barrier to entry where again, power users help the other users. And for our batch system, actually, the barrier to entry is we don't tell anybody about it, unfortunately. And so now everybody's, the power users are telling all the other users, and then sometimes the other users aren't using it. The user fairness isn't enforced yet. And so the novice users sometimes don't do what they're supposed to.
So I just wanted to, I mean, in response to Gautam's question, interpreting it as a user support problem, which I think you articulated. User support, I think, looks very different in the first year than it does a few years down the road, in the sense that you have, once you have some core users defined, they can sort of sub.
Right, and it is part of also why I think we're encouraging science collaborations with specific use cases to go and explore sort of the range of IDACs that might be able to support them, because building up those relationships greatly improves, I think, the user support experience. Yes.
So we have two remote things. First from Slack, Tom Wilson is asking right there. You can just would you like to.
It was just an aside, really, but I can say it. Yeah, just this was quite useful for me because I guess I realized how unrepresentative I am in my slightly weird in-kind contribution job. Not representative, which is why I think my question before was a bit weird. But it made me realize if there's this 99-1 split, how do, sort of comes back to all the other things that we just talked about, how do you know when you graduate up to the log level above? You know, you stop being an RSP level user, how do you advance to this, oh, I need more than one core and 2 gigs of RAM? How do you self-identify which pot you begin and you belong with to begin with, and then how do you know when you graduate? It was such a vague question. I just thought I'd write it down.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a little bit.
So I did try to write that in the user batch thing, where I suggested that it's a little bit arbitrary. You're right. It's not an easy to answer question, but it's a question of time. So if you're going to process one image, one CCD, it's going to take you so many minutes. So if you want to do a whole focal plane, so my thing was, when you're in the realm of a focal plane, a few hundred images, you can probably do this on the RSP. You're going to go and have several copies, but it will finish. Once you get 2,000 images, I think then you start to progress to, it's time to start thinking about going to the Resource Allocation Committee. I've proved my point with a few tens or hundreds of images. I have a good idea. I now want to scale that up. I should go and ask for more resources for it. So that's what I wrote. I don't know whether it'll stand the test of time, but it made sense to me when I was writing.
I think there's, for instance, like the HST proposal process. People work really hard to stay within the small allocation as long as they can. They try to avoid the medium one, right? But at some point it becomes, you're really hurting yourself by not going to the next step and paying that cost.
Well, they could.
There's lots of hands.
We're rapidly accumulating remote.
Okay. Yes. And then so the remote and then fed.
So just to check, Renee, do you have a question or has it been resolved?
Yeah, very briefly, just this discussion has been super useful, and I would just suggest that not to assume things will happen organically, and just to give guidance, particularly to smaller IDACs who maybe don't, as Gautam said, don't have super users in the same way, or just basically share how you are encouraging, and maybe even think of like making super user ambassadors or something where we give people a bit of training about how to guide each other, because I anticipate that otherwise there will be some groups that do really well and others that kind of falter and struggle to make any use of the data.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Let me second that. It's essentially what I wanted to say. We want to be careful that if we leverage like it will, if you build it, it will come. It's something that will happen naturally. That we keep an eye on, like, is it actually happen in an equitable way, and you don't end up, the big groups that have the gurus can support themselves, and maybe it works that sets enough time free to support those who don't. But you need to make sure that happens, and that it doesn't become like you will only survive if you're large enough to survive and to have
Yeah, I mean, our experience is a group of 10 has a guru.
But there's a lot of groups of less than 10.
Yeah, so.
And we don't want to penalize them. Like, that would
Yeah,
be
no, I think
very
that's a
unethical.
good point, but I'm just saying the large groups, large isn't that large, I guess
It was, Albie, did you have a point and then go back to online? Maybe? No? Okay, let's go to online.
Ken, do you want to unmute?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So, comment. Yeah, I think what Will's saying is more or less right. I had one comment on the. It's very true that people tend to be reluctant to kind of make the leap to properly using the batch system, for lack of a better phrase. One thing we're seeing that maybe can help bridge that gap, especially if you're expecting most people to come in via notebooks, is Dask workers may help kind of bridge that gap to get you from beyond your initial however many core you have on that local machine where you're logging into to get out to a few, maybe a few dozen, without making the next leap. Kind of use that as a transition can be pretty effective.
That's good. And I think I've seen example notebooks provided by the computing science team on various ways in which you can use things like that. Those things are really useful.
And then I think, Franz, if you want to unmute.
Yeah, so my question is kind of related, but it would be good to not set the transitions between these stages as really sort of high barriers. So going from a few resources to then saying I have to write a proposal, that is a pretty high barrier, right? And so you will then get a lot of people who will do workarounds. For instance, I have a workaround for Noir Lab where I can't, for instance, do the entire sky. So I do it in chunks of 5 degrees. And I run 80 times that thing, and then I stitch them together. Otherwise, and so you're going to have a mix of that. And so I guess it's the same resources being used, right? But I've got to go through extra work to do that one way or the other. But one route, which is just writing a for loop and then stitching it together, is an easier way for me than writing a proposal, waiting for the results, et cetera. So you need to have some idea of, these transitions need to be kind of a little bit gray, right? So that you have some flexibility there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Comment?
I was going to say, I mean, if you're using the analogy with telescopes, there's usually DD time where you can get a turnaround in a day, and for small stuff, and then you have 2 or 3 nights, and then you have large programs. So you can easily, which are sort of with weekly, biannual, or quarterly, or decadal cadence. So you can imagine the same thing with resource allocation.
Yeah, and I imagine depending on how painful the transition is made, people will avoid it for longer or less. But,
maybe it'll be inspired to make their code faster.
That too, yeah. So we should think about the incentives. More comments on this? Yeah, that is online and then Avi.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make an observation.
I get Avi and then I'll.
Oh, sorry. So I just wanted to make the observation that this discussion about small, medium, large, and transitions from one. The flip side of this is that it also opens up opportunities for that you wouldn't start if you didn't know that you could get at that. But also we have to be careful not to oversell or to over allocate right at the beginning, so that we don't, what's the phrase I'm trying to remember, mortgage the future. So you want to have things available to allocate
Yeah,
over reasonable times.
Right, and of course, so with the IDAC IDAC resource, what they're providing is hardware on a schedule, right? So if hardware is sitting idle in that first year, we're not saving that for the future. It's just sitting
No,
idle.
but that,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So, so working that balance out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the online.
Yeah, Franz, can I unmute?
Yeah, so I mean, the flip side of the flip side of flip side is that who's actually going to be judging and doing this allocation, and how often are they going to be doing it? Right, we have to think about that other burden on the community, which is non-trivial, right? And so you may want to have a tiered system where, you know, the barrier to that isn't that 10 people have to judge it or 5 people have to judge it, but you know, that maybe one person does, or maybe it's automatic. Maybe you can kind of, as you say, if, you know, the batch system shows availability, you could do that. And if it doesn't, then, you know, maybe you give some indication to the user, well, look, this isn't really going through the batch system. You should pump it up to the next level. But you know, there's going to have to be a pretty decent balance on that. I don't envision people, you know, some committee being able to turn around a lot of proposals on a week timescale, and you know, unless it's a really large committee and you don't get that many requests.
Stephen has a question, but Bob, do you want to provide any current thinking on the resource allocation process, or because it's in development, or it should just take?
Yeah, our goal is to have a first draft of what this might look like by the end of this year, and we're working on it. So this is a great input, Franz. I agree. My initial naive thoughts were that some of this, the bulk of this RAC process would revolve around the data releases. Maybe that's unrealistic. Maybe things will happen too fast, and we'll have to envision the analog of the TAC, which is, you know, either director's discretionary or fast turnaround or something like that. But those are all good ideas, and they're all in the mix. And I guess the good news is we still have a bit of time to get this figured out, and then we'll have to remain open. You know, the TAC process itself has evolved over time as new capabilities and the ability to turn things around faster have not only become possible, but become needed to maximize science. So I think those are all things we should be open to, and we'll be happy to take input. And the point of trying to get out something written down sooner rather than later, so we can continue to have this discussion in an informed way with you all. So we, you know, go back to the very first thing Knut put up today. Our main goal, really our only goal, is to make sure all the resources we have at hand are used as efficiently as possible.
Again, like if you go to the big computing facilities, so one thing that some of them do, for example, is if you do have an allocation via a proposal that was successful, your priority is higher. If you run out of that time, they will not throw you off, but your priority is a little bit lower, but you can do a lot with the idling nodes that are sitting here and there, so that you really have more. Again, you might want to talk to them also a little bit about if you have a batch system that works. I think that really helped a lot. Like, even if you're out of time, or in this case, you can give everybody an account and then they can see what is available, just like Franz was saying.
Right. Yeah. Stephen, you had your hand raised.
Something very quite similar to that, which is there are resource allocation committees that exist.
Yeah.
So the guys we deal with, they have to deal with very heterogeneous requests, with some quite large, some quite small, but also because it's all research, not just astronomy. It's like digital humanities versus particle physics.
Yeah.
And one person wants like a database of Shakespeare play reviews, and the other person wants to process all data from CERN. And they,
I kind of feel like, this is great input. It may be exhausted the range of topics and the energy of the people in the room. 10 minutes left, but happy to wrap up here. Anyway, this has been really useful for me. we're going to take all this input and use it to inform what we do next, and I think others. Yeah, thanks.